Hey everyone, wanted to chime in with a little more content from the content minds. Obviously, this week in American history has been one of the most consequential, um, obviously in our lifetimes, potentially in the lifetime of our country. And I wanted to chime in a bit, um, just talk a little bit about this most recent indictment of Donald Trump, but also think a little bit more broadly about some of the themes that are starting to emerge as these cases roll forward and as we sort of react to them as a society. What I've found really interesting is a lot of the response that I see from folks. Obviously, there's the far right response, which has been talked about a lot by other people, and I think doesn't need to be explored too much here. What I've found more interesting, actually, is some of the response you see coming from the center of the political spectrum and the left wing of the political spectrum, where I think that there's some sense of glee, perhaps, or some folks are feeling encouraged by this, but I think a lot of people's reaction tends to actually be a little bit more along the lines of just discouragement. And I wanted to talk a bit today about authoritarianism and my experience in reading a lot about this and studying it in graduate school, revolving around, I think, some of the self-fulfilling prophecies we see within fascist or authoritarian systems, where really, one of the most interesting things about authoritarianism is that it relies on that discouragement. It relies on the feeling of inevitability, and it relies on us onboarding and sort of unknowingly adopting a very similar, actually, authoritarian mindset, which is winning is what's important, ends justify means. The only thing that matters is the success or failure of an endeavor or a venture. It's an ideology built on strength, and strength really ultimately for human beings, I think, is often determined. Who we see as strong is often who we see as successful in what they want to do. And so I think fascism and authoritarianism more broadly kind of relies on us, sort of the middle of the political spectrum, or even people who would be normally opposed to an authoritarian system, kind of looking at the situation, looking at who has the strength, and without even realizing it, starting to think in those absolutes that really is the domain of an authoritarian, right? That's sort of playing the game exactly as they want it to be played, which is that, again, the only thing that matters is outcomes. The only thing that matters is absolutes, and we should think about the world in terms of winners and losers and success and failure, when I think intuitively we all know that that's the world is more complicated than that, right? Learning is a process sort of defined by failure. Growth is a process that is reliant upon failure. Our movement through our lives is almost, at least I'll speak for myself, my life is just a series of kind of falling forward, right? Failing, but doing so in a direction that is constructive instead of destructive. And I think one of the reasons that this tactic works so well when you look at the emergence of authoritarian systems, especially out of democratic systems, thinking of the Weimar Republic, or certainly the transition in Japan from a more representative system to a military dictatorship, there's this sort of great strength and great weakness to, I think, kind of being a middle of the road or left of center, educated, middle class person, and the strength and the weakness is that you become better at sort of rationally assessing situations, using information empirically and saying, okay, I've kind of run the numbers as much as I can, and I'm going to make the most reasonable decision about this mortgage that I can, or I'm going to make the most reasonable decision about this college that I can, or this credit card, or this, where I want to send my kids to go to school or something, right? There's a lot of, we want to constrain the possibilities through thinking about data and thinking about prediction, and we know that that's a flawed enterprise, but a lot of human endeavor is about this. How can we limit the uncertainty in our lives? So I think this in general can be a great strength, right? This ability to assess a situation, weigh things and assess things rationally can be a great strength. And this is often what we try to teach ourselves, teach our children, learn in university, right, is how to make empirical, rational judgments about the world and take the next best step forward. What's interesting about this in terms of authoritarianism is authoritarianism it comes from an urge that is so antithetical to that kind of thinking. It's really much more akin to the metaphor I thought about this week was somebody punches you in the mouth. You're in middle school and somebody socks you in the face and asks for your lunch money. At some juncture, when you are confronted with sort of inequitable force, right? Political force that exists explicitly to get more power, right? It's force for force's sake. It's a cult of strength and violence. And when you confront that kind of situation, it's like getting punched in the face in the lunchroom, but then saying, well, I want to sit here and kind of run the numbers on this for a few minutes and think about, what will the principals say? What will my parents say? How will this affect my ability to get into a good school 5-10 years from now, whatever it is? When in the moment, what you need to do is, it doesn't have to be violence. I'm not necessarily recommending that, but you have to do something to stand up for yourself and push back. You have to do something to demonstrate your agency in the world. You have to take an action, right? You don't need a paralysis by analysis, and you don't even need a perfect action. You don't necessarily need the action to be effective. Say, for example, in this circumstance, you fought back, right? And this kid is way bigger than you and knows how to fight, and you lose. You've still taken an incredibly important step in standing up for yourself, in asserting that that's not what's going to happen in this lunchroom on a daily basis, that you're not a free lunch, literally, right? But even more importantly than the signal that it sends to the bully and the other bullies and the other kids and the principal and whoever, your parents, is the signal it sends to you, right? There's this sort of William Jamesian value in just acting regardless of what the polling aggregator on 538 thinks, right? Whatever the polling is from the Pew Research Center, and this is said as a data scientist, right? But at some point, that will lead you to a place where it becomes very circular, and I think that's what we're seeing now with Trump. Is every iteration, if it was anybody else who wasn't an authoritarian, any one of these situations would have been damning to his political career, and he would be toast, right? But instead we find ourselves in this sort of like circular place where something happens and we get wrapped up in what the future will be and what this means for the future of the country and what this means for our predictions about what will happen in the election and what will happen in the primary and all these things. We're almost prisoners of not the moment. We can't just process in this moment what is happening, and it's this sort of circularity where we can't, it's very consequentialist, right? It's very obsessed with thinking and prediction, when really what we need is immediate actions to demonstrate to authoritarians that they will not win, right? Whether every one of those actions works or doesn't work, we hope that they work, but they won't all work, and they don't all need to work. There is a moral value in acting to defend liberal, plural society, right? There's an independent moral value to standing up for yourself and standing up for a system and a world that encompasses, however imperfectly, gay people and people of color and people like me and trans people. Everybody can live in this place. That's our goal. We don't always do it perfectly, but that's our design and that's our intention, most of us. And it is deeply true that there's an authoritarian strain of people who don't want that. And what they respect isn't the Pew Research Center. What they respect is strength, or the appearance of it. And so to communicate to them effectively, what you need to do is be strong and take action, because that's how we as human beings, as dressed up naked apes assess strength. We don't assess it through well-written research papers most of the time. Even I don't, right? And I think these are not my ideas. These have been things that have been said by much smarter people than me, I think, and people, unfortunately, who have, people like Hannah Arendt, who have experienced fascism, in a really firsthand, intimate, horrifying way. And what she said, to paraphrase, was that sometimes resisting is the avenue. Resistance, the active resistance, is the only avenue left to maintain human dignity in the face of authoritarianism. And one of my favorite writers, Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor and really a moral and intellectual hero and a titan. You should certainly look him up on YouTube. There's some amazing videos of him, and he wrote an amazing book called Man's Search for Meaning, which will change your life. But what he said was, you can take everything from me, but my attitude in a given set of circumstances. And he developed that ideology, literally starving to death in a concentration camp. And he said, you can't ever make me change how I think about my situation and my circumstances. And these kinds of perspectives, what they elucidate for us is that getting trapped in the logic of wins and losses is natural. But it's also deeply flawed, because it doesn't matter, because no one knows who will win and who will lose. These things aren't predetermined, and at some level, it's almost like being in a athletic contest, in a sports game, and one thing happens, then it doesn't go your way, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we're not going to win. I mean, obviously they just scored 2 goals, and there's only half the game left. I mean, at this rate, they're going to score, 2 goals every minute or what. I mean, and this obviously, in that kind of constrained context, it's ridiculous, right? You would never think that, and any good coach would say, don't think that way, right? Because every new moment is a new moment in this contest, right? And there's nothing, past performance doesn't indicate future results, and the future has yet to be written. So it's an interesting paradox, because I think it's part of what's clashing in our society right now. Is maybe a third of our society is very erudite on this kind of stuff and very vested in statistics and prediction and qualitative and quantitative data, and looking at these things very critically and rationally, and we're all kind of sitting there wringing our hands, right? And then there's a third that are sort of approaching this in a very different way, in a very strength-based and action-based way. And I think, as much as it pains me to say it, we on the side of not authoritarianism could adopt a little bit more of that just action for action's sake, take an action kind of approach to solving this problem. Instead of sitting back and wondering what the implications will be in the future, we could say what's happening this week with Jack Smith's investigation, and say, well, as an independent event in the history of this country, this person and this team of people have collected evidence that is very powerful, that indicates that a former president has done this or that, and we'll wait to see, obviously, what happens in the case. He's innocent until proven guilty, but there is an independent moral value in even just having the indictment, right? In having the trial, in having this information be explicit to everyone that something may have happened here and it needs to be exposed, and there's enough evidence to suggest that it needs to be investigated, and that he may have done some pretty horrifying things. And that's an initial step that has its own independent value in holding somebody accountable. So that's really what I wanted to say today. I hope that all makes sense. And again, on this topic, maybe more than ever before, I'm curious for your thoughts, because this is an interesting one to me, and involves thinking about some things, like I said, that have been written and thought about by some people I really respect and admire. So yeah, that's it for today. Thanks again for watching. Have a good one.